So lovely to see you in your beautiful oasis of a kitchen house.
My plants are taking over. I had to give a couple away. I was like, there's no room for me in this house.
I love it. No. It's so wonderful that you're as Instagrammable in Zoom life as you are in Instagram. So I appreciate that. I've mentioned you, of course, to the ladies, but just for those joining in right now, I'm really, really excited to have Cassandra, who I feel like is a friend, but I've realized that we've actually never met in like actual real-time life. But we've connected in so many other magical ways. And Cassandra is, she's a registered holistic nutritionist. She's been a personal strength trainer, but really her, if I may, I think your area of brilliance right now is really focusing on complex gut and brain issues and really helping people identify the root imbalances so that they can heal from a really holistic perspective. And so I invited Cassandra to come and chat a little bit more about body perfectionism as it relates to her own areas of work.
You know, yes, it's my area of focus of research right now, and it's also something I've personally been growing with and through. So I think there's a lot of learning in the minutia and in the conversation and coming up with, you know, if you guys are like, okay, well, what about this? Or yeah, that rings true for me, but you know, I have this block. It's like, that's where the real learning and change, I think, happens through conversation and coaching. So please feel free to, you know, I don't know how you work it, if you want to type a message first or just, you know, chime in. I'm easygoing. So basically what led me to understand this much about how our brain is constantly assessing ourselves and our environment for threat came about because I was struggling with my own autonomic nervous system dysfunction. So what that means is basically the traumas that I experienced as a young girl, and there were many different kinds, as most of us do experience. You know, if there's, it could be anything from, you know, not being heard in the family, or a lot of passive aggressiveness, or your feelings not being validated. It could be, you know, if you're adopted and there was like a 1 or 2 week period where you were without a parent and you were just in some type of care, your nervous system has this process. It's called neurogenesis. If you guys want to research Dr. Stephen Porges, if that interests you, he has been studying the vagus nerve for 40 years, and his research is incredible. And what he's coined is this term called Neuro Ception, which means despite our cognitive ability to process a situation, our nervous system knows what's happening, and it's going to respond in a plethora of ways to that stimuli. So for example, being without a parent for a few weeks after you're a newborn, your nervous system is incredibly intelligent. It's primed to know you're at risk of abandonment. You're at risk of death. You need to upregulate certain hormones. You need to be able to see things more clearly. You need to be able to hear things more clearly. That puts a lot more stress on your nervous system. And, you know, ideally it would just be an acute situation, but if it is something big like that, or a chronic situation like growing up in a home where you're not heard, not validated, not seen, our nervous system, that neuroception piece, actually registers that information and says you're under threat. Because at the end of the day, we need our tribe. We need our core relationships, our family, especially like, you know, primary care people, whether it's, you know, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, whatever. We need them to make us number one and feel safe and prioritized. And if we don't, think about before the Industrial Revolution, we were living in tribal communities where you were at risk of being eaten by an animal, or, you know, being left without food. Like, these are very primal, instinctual things that happen whether you're cognitively aware of it or not. So how that translates into body image and, you know, constantly assessing ourselves, what I've learned from my own journey and also my female clients, is that a lot of times, you know, you're walking by a mirror and you can't not look, or the opposite, you cannot look at a mirror. Things like constantly assessing your weight, or, you know, what's the number on the scale, or what size am I, or do I, you know, you're always looking to see, do I still have muscle definition? Is this food going to cause any water retention or any fat gain? You know, this hyper vigilant type of behavior around our bodies and food is an incredibly intelligent response to the threat of being abandoned or not loved and cared for and a part of something, which is primed into us over thousands of years of evolution to be a major focus. So we can't forget about that. I think there's so much shame that is tied into, oh, I have this problem with, you know, orthorexia or any disordered eating, or, you know, I can't seem to not stop looking in the mirror. And there's a lot of shame around it. Oh, I have to fix this. I have to, you know, I have to fix this. And really it's more scientific than that. I think it's about learning how we've created this ball of yarn, how things have wrapped up in this way, and then learning, how do I need to unravel it so that I'm nurturing my nervous system, I'm nurturing my limbic system. If you guys want to do some research on limbic system impairment, this is very, very, very common after somebody has experienced traumas. And trauma doesn't only mean physical trauma, right? We know that now. Everything I just explained about, you know, going without basic human needs of love and protection and nurture, being nurtured, is trauma. So when we're looking at how do I nurture my limbic system, and there's a great program called DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining System. It's about 300 Canadian. If you do get this program, it is incredibly well researched. It is changing people's lives, on like first responders, people who have been struggling with, you know, chronic multiple chemical sensitivities, IBS, fibromyalgia, because these are all related to how our nervous system is registering our environment for threat. So it also works for people who are dealing with any body dysmorphia or any hypervigilance around food, because you're rerouting the nervous system, right? It's not so much about willpower and black and white. It's not like, oh, I just need to stop. I need to stop. This is bad. It's not good for my health. I'm sick of living this way. You have to become an artist, and you have to become, you know, this person that is advocating for yourself, stepping out of the victim role. Not saying that any of you guys are in that state, but generally we tend to be in this powerless state where we're looking for somebody to come and tell us what to do, when really what it comes down to is we're cherry picking based on our own personalities and our own, you know, unique life experiences to say, okay, I need to work on gut health. So I'm going to, you know, eat an anti-inflammatory diet. I'm going to test for infections. I'm going to clear infections. That's one piece. I'm going to work on my limbic system. I'm going to learn how my nervous system, my amygdala, is responding by becoming self-aware, that mindfulness piece of what is my body doing in this moment? Am I clenching up? Is my breathing increasing? Or am I holding my breath? Are my thoughts racing? Do I feel better or worse around this person? Am I emotionally eating? Why? Sit there and feel what's happening to you in that moment. And it's not a quick fix. The DNRS, the limbic system retraining, is very quick in the sense that it might have taken you 20, 30, 40, 50 years to develop these coping mechanisms. But the research shows it takes about 6 months of daily practice to completely change the way that your brain is receiving your environment, including yourself, and then changing that. And what that does is you start to recognize that constantly scanning the mirror, your body, food, your progress, these are all signs that your body is, and your brain is assessing everything to say, am I okay? Am I securing love? Am I securing attachment? What's the word I'm looking for? Acceptance or not. And that's the Neuro Ception piece. You're not always cognitively aware of it. It is happening on autopilot. It's just this, it's like the music in the background. It's just happening. So, you know, we really do need to honor there's been such a massive jump in evolution in the past 150 years. You know, we had these slow progressions where we were always in a tight unit in a tribe, and we were always, you know, hunting for our food. So it really, there was no, for hundreds of thousands of years, that was pretty much it. Be with your tribe, be safe, hunt, gather, sleep, avoid death. And then all of a sudden we have TVs, and we have microwave dinners, and we have fashion, and we have partying, and all of these things that are, you know, changing the way that we interact with life and ourselves. But the root part of our nervous system that's developed over those thousands of years is survive. Survive. Make sure you survive. Lack of that security from, we don't have those tribal connections either. Like, think of how distant we are, right? We might have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or mom, dad, maybe, you know, you do have a good network of friends, but are we in that tribal community where it really, that neuroception piece of feeling safe with our tribe and feeling accepted and loved and nurtured, reciprocal relationships, these all play a massive part in our feelings of being disconnected and not safe and wanting to be hypervigilant. So why somebody might pick hypervigilance over self, you know, through food restrictions or disordered eating, et cetera, versus substance abuse or, you know, sex or whatever the other kind of coping strategies we develop, it really depends on our genetics and also our environment, our epigenetics. So as we're growing up, you know, there's so many studies to show that the way that a parent or somebody in our past lineage was traumatized, that is encoded in our nervous system response, our DNA response to threat. So now we have this genetic lineage piece that we have to acknowledge. How did my mom, my dad, my grandparents respond to war, to famine, to death in their family, to these really traumatic things that have happened over you know, our lineage? And then have compassion for ourselves and how we might show up. Maybe we shut down, maybe we go to food. You know, there's some really great podcasts on, I'm going to see if I can dig it up. I'm sure I have it, Kiki, and I can send it to you after. It's wonderful. It's like the guy's explaining how the child responded, and there was no real reasoning for it other than when he started digging, he understood what happened to the parents, and it was in her DNA to respond this way to her trauma. So we have to honor that, have compassion for ourselves, have compassion for our parents, and say, it is what it is. It's biochemistry. And we need to, the beautiful thing is that the brain is plastic. Our nervous system is plastic, so we can reroute and change those things just as they were turned on, right? So that is basically, in a nutshell, how I prime the education with my clients for them to understand this is a fast brain, slow brain problem. This is a conscious awareness, unconscious awareness. I don't want to say problem, but challenge. And it's not so much about, you know, mantras are great. Mantras play a role in my healing, but it's not just willpower. It is the art form of rerouting and repairing the nervous system.
And this comes at a really interesting time for me in particular, because I was just reading a passage that very similar to what you're talking about in Bruce Lipton's The Biology of Belief book. And he talks about obviously how it's not just willpower, it is also changing your subconscious. I'm curious to know, what are the most kind of successful ways that you've been able to change your subconscious clients' subconscious in terms of kind of like reprogramming the brain for this? Because I think it was Francesca in another meeting, she asked, you know, why is it that some of us are so obsessed with food, whether it be restricting it or possibly overindulging in it, and the expert said that, well, you know, we've created all those really thick neural pathways to be obsessed with food. And so what are some of the steps that you take to kind of maybe even just be less obsessed with hating ourselves, or less obsessed with identifying as, you know, just constantly assessing what we look like and why that matters?
Yep. Definitely. That is such a beautiful point, because there was this mindfulness meditation coach who I adore. Her channel is Kernel of Wisdom. And she's also an eating disorder and addiction psychotherapist. And she's got just the most amazing content on loving self-compassion. So the statement when I was in one of her classes, she said there was this Buddhist monk that came forward and said the thing that people need the most right now is self-compassion. That's what we need the most. So what I will usually do, there's a few ways that I'll work on this with clients, is first, I call them POPs. It's an acronym, but basically when you notice the trigger or the behavior, the tendency, and instead of choosing that, shit, I'm doing it again, I'm wrong, I'm failing, whatever the case is, we try on what it might feel like to just practice self-compassion. And compassion is different than self-love. Even empathy, like self-empathy. I love practicing what that might feel like. And a lot of us might not be able to connect with that energy right away, and that's okay. But what I'll ask my clients to do if they can't feel what compassion feels like right away is I'll say, if you have an animal, or you have a child, or you love plants, or, birds, or whatever the case is, if you were to see that animal or that plant going through a hard time, that child coming in and they're upset, or, I don't want to say like it's so morbid, but the plant's dying or something, right? And you're like, oh my God, no, like, what's up? I'm here for you. Let me take care. What do you need? And you have understanding, right? If that animal was hurting and you had to take them to the vet, it's like your heart sinks and you're just like, oh baby, okay, we're going to get through this. I'm going to take care of you, And we often don't have that pathway primed for ourselves, where if we are struggling with food obsession or body dysmorphia at all, where we vilify ourselves. It's like, hey, we're not good enough, we're not good enough, we're not good enough. And then we recognize we have the acknowledgement, we see the pattern, and it amplifies the shame. It amplifies the I'm not good enough. When we have the choice, it's not like a pill is going to do this for us. We have to choose to go the opposite direction and say, I'm going to try on that self-compassion. And self-compassion can often feel like giving up or not trying hard enough, or, we can make all these subconscious belief systems about what self-compassion will mean for our healing journey. And that's a choice too. Maybe explore, does it actually mean that I'm not going to move forward if I just love myself in this moment? Does it mean that I'm not going to achieve my goals if I'm practicing self-compassion right now? And check in with that. There's no right or wrong answer. Everything that we come up against as a roadblock is, in my opinion, the fruit. It's it's like the seed. It's the fertile soil for us to go, oh, pay attention to that. There's something there that I need to learn more about myself, or more about this question in my mind, because there's often a subconscious belief pattern there that we're up against. And that's amazing work to say, when did I develop this thought pattern? Do I want to continue having this? What if I try, and then take it that extra step further and say, what if I tried to implement something I learned from a coach or a book or a podcast? How does that feel? Because there's only so much, like, taking the brain to that point of just that place without saying, hey, let's try this on, it has nowhere to go. Right? The brain is this incredible software, this plastic software that we have to keep downloading and rerouting, downloading and rerouting. And then the neurochemicals change, the neurotransmitters change, our physiology changes, our gut health changes, because we have to remember, when we're stuck in limbic system impairment, or we're stuck in that hypervigilant state, the brain is turning the autonomic nervous system in a state of fight or flight. And what we know now about being in a chronic state of fight or flight is that our digestion shuts down. It takes too many calories to digest food when we're under threat. The brain doesn't know the difference between being chased by a bear and being hypervigilant about our food. It's going to say something is wrong. We need to be prepped for that fight. So digestion shuts down, slows down, food ferments in the gut, it putrefies, it can lead to IBS, food intolerances, leaky gut infections. But then on the other side of things, we're also not detoxing. So detoxing is a parasympathetic function. When we are in a rest and digest state, then we're detoxing, right? So then we get this issue. If this is a chronic thing that's happening day after day, week after week, year after year, and the gut and the brain are bidirectional, as we know, there are more neurons in the gut than there are in the brain, and we continue that pathway, that pattern, then it's like, okay, is it the chicken or the egg? Is my mindset affecting my gut, or is my gut putrefaction, lack of detoxification, etc., affecting the neurotransmitters that my brain are able to have access to? And it's both, right? We have to, that's why my business is so much about, okay, let's identify infections, let's clear infections, and let's work on the brain, the mindset. Right? So pulling your executive function on board, executive function in the brain, where you can say, I'm going to pull out of that trauma loop and I'm going to re-engage with a more health supportive thought, which is always visualizing what you want. And think about that. We often know what we don't like so well, but we don't know what we want, what it's going to feel like, who we're going to be with, what we're going to be eating, and the ease of that process of picking the food and eating it. And you're not even, it's not even like you're not saying anything like, I'm not going to have IBS. I'm not going to have hypervigilance. I'm not going to feel shame after I'm eating it. It's always, I am in Italy and I'm eating the bread and I'm with my beautiful friends and I can smell the warm, sweet Italian air and I'm drinking the wine. And you want to attach that with emotion. Emotion strengthens synapses. So if we're like constantly in this state of hypervigilance and self-shaming and lack of compassion and feeling, bulldozed constantly with this challenge, we're strengthening those synapses because there's often powerful emotion attached to that as well. But if we can, and I'm not saying it's easy, guys, I've been there. It is difficult, but like anything, like training your muscles, it gets stronger the more that we visualize, this is what I'm going to feel like, live like, look like, all of the things when I am done. And the more we can live there, the more the brain believes that. And the more we go into that parasympathetic state.
And it's interesting that you mentioned even like in those thought patterns, you're also thinking and you're visualizing what you would look like. And I was going to ask you, like now in this part of your journey where it's like we might have even come from a history of like using visualization almost like to a fault, like if we were being overly restrictive. And so I would love to know your opinion on if we can sort of use like manifestation and visualization in terms of like aesthetic goals, like what are your thoughts towards that? Because can that be like a slippery slope? Like, should we have a goal of like what we want to look like and kind of like feel into that, or is that like part of the problem?
Yeah, it is definitely, it can be part of the problem. So I would say notice the energy that you're feeling or encompassing when you're doing that visualization. So in DNRS, they talk about slowly introducing, challenges, let's say, so that your nervous system can slowly become accustomed to that state or to that challenge. So if you're somebody who is having a really hard time with that, intense, it feels unhealthy, that attachment to a certain body image or a certain body style, we want to, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Introduce it slowly so that the nervous system can kind of like get a sense to kind of figure out if it's
right.
Okay.
Yes. So you might want to pick something else in your visualization. You might not be picturing your body, but you're picturing your environment. You're picturing who you're with. You're playing out the scenario, and your body comes later. That's something that can be strengthened because, really it comes down to when you're sitting there and you're in that energy of like it just feels unhealthy. Do you know the difference? Can you feel it when you're like, this doesn't feel right. I don't feel light. I don't feel connected to this. This feels dangerous in a sense. I don't feel safe in this energy. You don't want to nurture that. I would say shift to something that feels safe to focus on and visualize until that's safer for you.
Totally. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions or things to add? I know we're all like frantically writing down every word that you're saying.
Oh, amazing. Thank God it's recorded, right? We can go back.
I know, right? That's what I was thinking. Okay. Yeah, no, everyone's super focused. There was something else that I wanted to ask you. It was when you were talking about for those of us who don't feel like we've had trauma, even though like in terms of like trauma, and might not be able to identify even with just that, like that verbiage of like, oh, trauma, or like we're not sure. What would you say? And the second thing kind of, I think, is following up with that. If, do you have to understand all your issues to get over them, or are you the like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like, do you have to always unpack everything, or can you sometimes heal those things without necessarily even understanding? Like maybe I'll never know what happened to my grandparents and why, I developed that, right? But it's like, so where's the line of like, how much do you need to know in order to fix it?
I love your question. So good. So I get that question a lot with my clients, and I think it really depends. It depends person to person. So, DNRS, the dynamic neural retraining system, their theory is, we understand that you're going to have to unpack some of this stuff from time to time with a therapist or a medical doctor or a coach, but really you want to do the DNRS before and after those appointments if you have to go there and unpack a certain problem. So that the brain isn't getting like amplified in that, right? And I don't know why I keep losing my train of thought. Remind me again, Kiki. Sorry, my brain is...
how much do you need to unpack? But I think you answered that. And the first part was, what if you don't identify as like having trauma, or like you don't necessarily, like, you wouldn't say that you've had like a traumatic childhood or something like that. It's like, do you, like, what are your thoughts on if people are like, I feel fucked up right now, but I don't have anything to place it to. Like, I can't say it's because my parents did this or that.
There's always something. There's always something. There's either somebody who made you feel a certain way in high school, a friend who abandoned you or made fun of you. Maybe you saw something in a movie that created this belief system based on what was happening with your parents at the time. There's always, always, always something. Always that, we can track it back to. And, I do that in session with clients where we'll just, especially with emotional eating, we'll be like, when was the first time you remember feeling this way? What was happening in your life at that time? And there'll always be something that comes up. And we don't want to, hammer that to death. It's just more to have awareness and understanding of, why do I have this as a coping tool? It stemmed from this event, or these series of events. And trauma, the word trauma, because the brain is an association machine, and we are not, I'm assuming we're not trained in the trauma field, everybody here, and most people aren't, right? We see and hear the word trauma based on movies and different things on TV where we're like, somebody's been seriously injured and they need to go get help. That's called a big T. Then we have little T's, and there's a lot of therapists and coaches who are coming out with this new research that's saying we need to start to talk about these little T's more, because they are severely disrupting our experience in life as well as our physical health. I wanted to add to the last question in terms of, do I need to know about my genetic lineage and how much do I need to unpack and all of that? Really great question. I'd say when you're up against a roadblock, that's where you're probably going to need a little bit more conversation. You need to develop more tools or more understanding, more information, so you can have more compassion for yourself. But it doesn't mean you have to have this like robust list of things to unpack and then tick everything off to heal. Your journey will tell you, like your body, your mind, your roadblocks will be the map.
Mm-hmm. And what are some questions that we can ask ourselves as it relates to kind of trying to...
You're frozen.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you were being like, yeah, Adele, because I was talking about Adele. I was like, yeah, no, she's great. I asked, what are some of the questions that we can like ask ourselves to prompt some insights? Like, because I was mentioning that when Adele was in, she gave a really like broad primer on CBT, and she was sort of instructing us, like, ask where you learned about love, where you learned about money, but when it comes to kind of food and body image and stuff like that, are there any particular questions that you ask clients or get them to ask themselves as it relates to kind of trying to figure out some deeper things? Because it can feel really vague to just be like, oh, like think back to the last time I felt this way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there's any specific.
Yeah, that can be really challenging. I find having somebody who's, skilled to ask those questions and pull you through it is beneficial, because we often will block out a lot of stuff too, right? It's something that's a really also intelligent process to protect ourselves. So I think, one thing that I really, and I tread lightly with this because it is very, very deep. I've had people like they cry when I do this with them, and I'm not laughing at them, but it's just like really moving. But inner child meditations. So what I would recommend, I don't know if I should do this without coaching around it, but so there's a video, I can send this to you also. Okay. There's a video I did with Blue Matter Project. They're a trauma-informed yoga and meditation company. And at the end of the interview, I did a guided inner child meditation. And then I would feel more responsible sending that to you because it's not a quick overview. It's like, you can see how we go through it. And with that, what you're able to do is really see what comes up, and it's going to come up. When you're creating this space and you have this visualization of somebody to speak to and see, and they come forward and they tell you, it's you, it's that subconscious, that deep stuff that wants to be seen and heard. And, a lot of people will say, can I do this? Can I even do this? It seems so like, if we haven't done that type of work before, it can feel very scary, but we can do it if you're open to it. So what that will do is it helps you to actually see what's coming forward, what's deep in there that I've been suppressing, that I haven't been wanting to pay attention to. And it can elicit a lot of emotions. So we want to make sure that you're nurtured afterward and that you know how to pull yourself out and take care of yourself afterward. So that's one thing I can send the end of the video. I think it's like a 5-minute thing. But I would just honestly spend some time and just sit back, no pressure on yourself. And it doesn't have to be, you can do it while you're walking or, at home in a quiet space meditating. It doesn't have to be, any particular way, but you are reflecting and just thinking, when did I start to feel this way, this intensity, this repulsion, or this fear? Because around that time, whenever I ask my clients, when did you start to develop IBS symptoms? And they'll say, oh, I was 13, 14. Well, what was happening? And there's always something that was happening at that time. Oh, I was 21, 22. What happened? Oh, I had this terrible breakup with a boyfriend and my thyroid went. I developed Hashimoto's. And when we go deeper, there was a traumatic divorce that they hadn't processed from their parents, So there's something that's there around the time that we start to become symptomatic, where our body is like, I can't handle anymore. And it starts to present, it's like, I call it the toxic bucket theory. You have this bucket when you're born and it's, empty, probably has a little bit of, toxicity at the bottom from, your parents passing on toxicity, that's fine. And then as you're going through life and, you know, you're eating candy and sugar, and then, you know, you just start high school and maybe you start smoking cigarettes, and you're going through tons of stress or breakups or whatever. And then you go to university and it's like, you're not sleeping, you're drinking tons of coffee. Maybe you've had, you know, lots of partying. And then eventually these experiences, they pile up in this bucket until one thing comes in, and that drop is enough to make it spill over. And that spill over is our body presenting with these symptoms, these coping mechanisms, these patterns that don't serve us. So we have to empty that toxic bucket. We have to go back and figure out, what was it that created these patterns?
And it was very interesting. It's so obvious, but I never thought about it this way. You said detoxing is obviously a parasympathetic, like it's action. It's which makes sense. Like when you sleep, that's when you're really, I mean, we're detoxing all the time, but that's when we're detoxing, you know, at a greater extent. And for some of the, I know no one's going to ask this question, so I'm going to ask it on behalf of those lovely ladies. Some of us are dealing with a lot of constipation, and some of the ladies are, you know, asking me like, what do I do? I didn't necessarily want to ask this to anyone or kind of provide any guidance on that particular thing, but I know that you have both like the gut and the, you know, holistic nutrition background mixed with this sort of thing. I'm wondering if there's any patterns, or I'm curious to know your thoughts on what, obviously it could be a billion different things if someone's struggling with chronic constipation. And so maybe even just like the first steps that you'd recommend if in terms of maybe even seeking more support on that, because obviously like this process that we've been on has been about really trusting themselves so that they can eat properly in a way that they feel good. But with that said, if there is something going on specifically like chronic constipation, there's only so much that you can go with listening to the body. And I say like, okay, well, what does the constipation feel like in the gut? Like, you know, what does it want to tell you? But how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah. So whenever a client comes to me with any IBS symptoms, I always want to first determine what's in there, what's happening in the microbiome. Mm-hmm. So depending on their symptoms, I would recommend either, you know, there's about 4 or 5 different panels that I really like using with my clients. I'll usually do a leaky gut and a DAO histamine test to see how well is your gut clearing histamine. Histamine intolerance is really, really common with people who have IBS. And it just presents with, you know, constipation. It could present with hives or skin irritation, fatigue, etc. And all foods have histamine, and some more than others. So, you know, when we hear, eat fermented foods, it will help with your gut health. Well, fermented foods are of the highest amount of histamine. So, you know, we want to figure out how sensitive is your gut to histamines. How leaky is your gut? Is it hyperpermeable due to stress and constipation and foods putrefying in the gut, weakening that bond of the tissues in the gut? We want to figure that out because there's a whole protocol to remediate that, or to remedy that. And then I also use a comprehensive stool test. So we want to know, how is your pancreas working? Is it supplying enough enzyme flow? How is your gallbladder working? Is there fats in the stool? What does your bacteria look like? Are there a bunch of different strains of bacteria that are too high or too low? That's going to play a massive role in digestion. Do you have any candida, any parasites? These are all going to affect digestion. And I find, you know, 9 times out of 10 when I'm testing people, they always come back with some type of pathology in the gut. There's some type of infection, because when you're under chronic stress, and that hypervigilance or that Neuro Ception piece, and you're in that chronic state of fight or flight, your body becomes the perfect host for pathogens to amplify, to nestle themselves into your gut and feed off of our nutrition and create symptoms like constipation, gas, bloating, loose stool, etc. So once we identify what's happening in the gut, we do an anti-infection protocol, and that has to be done. You know, there's so much research that's Dr. Nemchek, Nemchek, I believe he's in the US. Dr. Nemchek is this amazing doctor that he explains, how do you fix autonomic nervous system dysfunction, the way that we're presenting with this obsession, right? And it can be anything from autism to autonomic nervous system dysfunction, the way it presents for us in our own unique situations. And there's the brain retraining program, the vagus nerve, but then there's also the bottom-up approach, where we have to clear infections in order for the immune system and the nervous system to downregulate and calm down, so that you can have proper bowel movements.
And what would you say for the person that's nervous about doing this sort of test, because they're just working on intuitive eating and just listening to their bodies and just kind of being more free, and they're cautious to be like, oh, well, I don't want to add more food rules because I've just been trying to work with like just listening to my body, and how do you balance that if you have a really strict protocol, but then you also tell the person kind of like, okay, but like just listen to your body.
Yeah. So we have to, I would never leave them alone with that. You'd need one-on-one coaching 100% to unpack the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And as you are moving through the emotions of dealing with, okay, I'm going to go on an anti-candida diet or an anti-SIBO diet, as part, it's medicinal, right? So when we can separate the emotional attachment from food, or not even separate, when we can start to see all the different roles that food play outside of our pleasure, right? That it is medicinal, or it can be. And when we start to kind of invite the brain to receive food in different ways other than we've always had that attachment to it, we're then rerouting neural pathways. We're then changing the physiology of the brain. It's not a quick fix. It's not like you take this step and then all of a sudden, bam, it's okay. It's dipping our toe in the water. And it's having conversation around, how cold is it? How hot is it? How much do you like that? What don't you like about it? Why? What can we implement to allow you to maybe dip your whole foot in next time and you feel safe around that? This is a process. This isn't something we want to rush through or demand our bodies and our brains and our hearts to respond immediately to. Again, we're becoming advocates for our own health. We're learning, what are my challenges? What do I need? How do I facilitate that for myself? Because change is possible. The brain's plastic and we can show up in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions before I have one last question? And then I won't take any more of your time, but does anyone else want to chime in? No. As I said, a quiet group. It's maybe because I'm
okay.
Then no one needs to be, you know what I mean? Okay, so ending on kind of like a positive and inspirational note, although this whole thing has been very inspirational, you mentioned that and I wrote it down, the DNRS, that kind of process helps you sort of cherry pick which one works for you. Is that correct? Like which sort of like solutions, like it's not like a full on like just do this. So I'm curious to know, what has your what's one of the like little cherry picked like healing modalities, or I don't know, an affirmation or something that has really helped you in terms of loving your body wherever it's at, and just like actually having confidence that's not tied to like an external validation or like just like an outcome, but just loving it from a place of like it's always okay?
Yeah, I would say my honest answer would be two things. It's not one thing, it was a combination. So I had to get my neurotransmitter balanced. So I was, as a holistic practitioner, I was really, kind of spoon-fed the idea that medication is giving up. Medication is not good. And I came to the point where I realized it's up to me to decide what I need for my healing journey. And I decided to go on medication. And that really calmed my brain down. A lot of the hypervigilance, there's Trudy Scott? Trudy Scott, I believe. She is an amazing gut-brain nutritionist, and she has identified specific nutrients, L-theanine, different B vitamins, different nutrients that are lacking in the brain that present with rumination, obsessive compulsive disorder, obsession, or even, I found this one fascinating, like exhibitionism, right?
Wow.
It's like there's these personality traits that show up when we're lacking a certain type of neurotransmitter. So getting my neurotransmitters straight was a big piece, but then also the DNRS, because DNRS, like, you know, hypervigilance, it was insane. Working in gyms with mirrors everywhere, constantly comparing my body to other trainers. Am I fit enough? Am I muscular enough? How do I look in these pants? It was non-stop, and it was exhausting, and it made my gut so tight. So when I started implementing the DNRS and realizing those were pops, those were triggers, I started to go, you know, it's a 7-step system. You identify the trigger, you go into rerouting the neural pathway. You have this like conversation with yourself saying, this is what it's been. This is the service it's been giving me. This is what I've been getting from this pattern in the past, but this is what I'm going to do now. Mm-hmm. And you're choosing over and over again to step into a different energy, a different way of showing up in that moment in your life, where there's a whole world around you outside of that mirror or outside of that, you know, obsession over the meal. There's tons of other things going on. So when you can bring your brain into that state and say, what do I want? What do I want to feel? Where do I want to be? Who do I want to be? All of those things. It's pulling away from that really strong neural pathway. So the DNRS, you know, I started feeling the changes on day one. After 1 week, it was amazing, the things that were happening in combination. For me specifically, I needed that medication. I was very, very ill, and I didn't realize that the traumas had actually translated into a brain injury. Wow. That I got diagnosed with 3 times by different practitioners. I didn't believe it until the 3rd time.
Wow.
Right?
What do you think made it the 3rd time that you had to believe it? Was it simply just like 3 times a charm, or did the person deliver the information where it was just like, okay, he's actually telling the truth, or she's actually telling the truth?
No, it was like, I can't ignore this anymore. 3 different pracs that I really trust in different areas of expertise have done this. Then I started researching the propensity, or how common it is for people who have experienced traumas, repetitive traumas, to have a traumatic brain injury. It's a physical injury that translates. It's like, you know, when we hear the word injury, we think there was a physical, you know, something.
Think of hockey players or something.
Yeah. When the physiology of the brain actually changes because of that pain, the chemicals that are released, those hormones that are released, that actually changes the physiology of the brain, and it translates into brain injuries. So the DNRS program does help to repair that as well.
Wow.
And I get back from DNRS. I'm not sponsored by them or anything.
No, I love it. And like, even if you didn't have an issue, it sounds like DNRS is like an awesome thing to do regardless. So I know that we're all going to go sign up for this after that. So I wish you kind of did have an affiliate link, and we could all sign up on your link. But I'm so grateful for you, Cassandra. And I'm so happy that you were obviously able to heal out of it, obviously so well and so thoroughly, because the way that you show up to the world now is just a tribute to all of the work that you've done. And so the fact that you're willing to share all of those avenues that you've took and really highlight the key things that really move the needle for you is just so amazing. So thank you so much, honestly, for everything that you've been through, and then now for sharing it all so that we can kind of fast track it. So we're all so grateful. That was a wonderful, like, I wrote down so much. I can't wait to like Google after all of this. I'm just like, all the names. I'm like, Trudy, Scott, who's that? So thank you so much. You're amazing. I shared your socials with everyone as well. So yeah, hopefully we can all stay in touch. And thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and love you, girl.
Mwah, love you more. Okay. Bye. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.